already sent you the videos, so I'll update, I'll upload the videos today. So we'll do the presentations, and I'll finish the last question on the exam. Okay, and you should have already received the review for the midterm. I missed one class because I forgot my camera, so you're going to get, if you didn't come to class, you're going to need to get the notes from your team member. Okay, so I think it was maybe the first or the second midterm, so I didn't record it, so you need to get it from somebody else. And then the 4 memos, make sure you bring those, make sure they're stapled. Homework 2, I think over half the class did it, so that was great. So make sure you put those together, make sure you have a cover page. We're going to finish up the presentations. If you don't do the presentations today, then you can do them the week after, a week in 2 weeks, right? Because we're going to come back and we're going to do the exam. And then you can do you can finish up your PowerPoints after that. And then the midterm exam is going to be Tuesday, Thursday, April 23rd and 25th. If you have any issues, if you're not going to be around, if you're, something's going to happen, just contact me and I'll work something out with you. Okay, but you should be able to get through it pretty quickly. It'll probably take the 2 sessions, and then I'll have a review session that Wednesday. And then deliverable 1, I'm going to call you and I'll go today, and I'll go over any outstanding stuff. You can come see me when you get back from the break, or you can call me, or we can work out stuff over the phone or via text or something if you want to finish that up. But again, you can always add it in with the deliverable 2. But I'd really like to see it at this point before you submit it. I'd rather just go through it with you and then sign off on it. And then deliverable 2 is going to be due Thursday, April 25th. Again, everybody's cover pages, I think except for one person, looks really good. Make sure you have the clip, 4 memos stapled together, and put them in order, please. Stocks, oil, gold, and bonds in that order. Okay. And then you're going to have I'm going to give you a clean midterm in a blue book, which you're going to work on in class over the 2 days. If you did a good job in taking notes, you've got a really good study guide to go from. You're going to hand that in too. And then homework number 2, make sure you have the cover page and you staple it together. And then the extra credit problem set. Again, you can give that to me, or you can give it to me later if you want to do it. And then the movie review worksheet. That's going to be, that's The Big Short, not the Inside Job. And then make sure you answer all the questions on the worksheet. And then give me your resume, your Mary Beth approved, resume, and then I'll take another look at it. And then once Mary Beth signs off on it, you should come see me, okay, so I can help you soup it up and put in some value-add metrics. Okay, she doesn't do that stuff. She does a great job of getting it there, and then I can take your resume to the next level. Okay, and come see me too if you're looking for internships and jobs, because you probably want to use me as a reference for a call or a letter of recommendation. Those always come in handy too. Seal the deal. Okay, and then you get extra bonus points if you give me a business card. Berkeley's got it, Stanford's got it, MIT's got it. Everybody who's undergrads, they have a business card. It's got your name, major, concentration, graduation date, maybe your address, definitely your LinkedIn profile, your email, your phone number, those kind of things. And then a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll do blue or black, or I like the blue or the red, the backing, and then they put their initials on the back. It looks pretty nice. And make sure you don't use flimsy cardstock. Make sure you use medium or thick cardstock, because when you give it to somebody, you're giving them this flimsy business card, they'll probably think you're kind of weak, right? You give them something that, it's first impressions, right? Everything's first impressions. All right, any questions on this? Good? Okay, I think you guys are on. make sure other people who are going to do presentations, you should be working on your presentations now, editing them, and getting ready to go. Okay? And action.
All right, so we did chapter 15, how firms raise capital.
And don't forget to speak up really loud.
Yeah. So one of the main topics that is mentioned in chapter 15 is the idea of bootstrapping.
Okay, Colin.
Most businesses are started by an entrepreneur that has a vision about like they're either innovating a product or there's a new business venture, and they believe like wholeheartedly that there is a lot of viability in their idea, so they want to pursue that further. So the entrepreneur might flesh out like ideas at the beginning, and they want to build like a foundation. They'll usually do that by holding conversations with people that they hold dear and close to them, like friends, family, people they trust that might not like rip their idea or whatever the case may be. So when you have your initial idea, you also need initial funding. And this is the process where entrepreneurs begin to seed money and obtain other necessary resources, and this is what is known as bootstrapping. Seed money usually comes directly out of the pocket from the entrepreneur and early investors. Examples where this money can come from is savings, sales of assets. You can sell your car, some people sell their house, whatever the case may be. Loans from friends and family, bank loans. This initial seed money is usually spent almost entirely on a prototype and or the business plan. Venture capital is the bootstrapping period, only lasts about 2 years. During this time, the founders of the company will most likely have a business plan and prototype that they can travel around the country showcasing in hopes that someone will hop on board and invest in the company. This is when venture capitalists come into play, and these are firms or individuals that help up-and-coming businesses get their start, and they provide a vast majority of the early financing. When it's a single person or entity, they're known as angel investors, and they're usually wealthy individuals that invest their own money into this idea or product innovation. Venture capital emerged in the 1960s when the first capital limited partnerships were established. Today, the market for venture capitalists includes thousands upon thousands of professionals. Most of them work at just about 1,000 firms. The hubs are in Massachusetts and California. Firms are niche specific and will focus on one sector. So you have venture capitalists that focus on food, hospitality, medical devices, appliances, technology, etc. Many of these firms tend to focus on high tech. So that's usually what they really go for. This is a characteristic template of a venture capitalist firm. This is exhibit 15.1 from the textbook.
Make sure you do this in your
So you have right there investments in funds and then investments by venture capitals. Why venture capital is different? It's important because entrepreneurs have limited access to traditional means to fund their projects, because normally they have to pay for this out of pocket. So they can't just go into the bank and take out a $2 million loan because they have nothing really to show for themselves at the moment. Reasons why: there's a lot of risk involved, types of productive assets, information asymmetry problems. So because they're working on their ideas, usually things might change. So banks don't want to give out money to people that keep changing their idea. Here we go into the venture capital funding cycle. So starting a new business, you have to, let's say you have been detailing cars for 15 years, and one day you decide to create a detailing service that is a cut above the competition. Business plan, it describes what you envision for your business, why consumers will want to go to you, and how you're going to accomplish this goal, and what resources you need. And then part 2, the first stage. So after you've been meeting with people that might be interested, they might only want to some might want to invest, but they might only want to invest in installments to reduce their risk. So if they fund in stages, it requires the entrepreneurs to make personal investments as well, syndicating investments, and maintaining an in-depth knowledge about their industry. So then part 3, you go back into this stage funding idea. So the idea is that it gives the venture capitalists an opportunity to reassess the management team and the firm's financial performance, and their investment gives them equity interest in the company, usually in convertible preferred stock. And personal investment, venture capitalists need the entrepreneur to make a substantial investment out of their own pocket as well before they put any money, because they need to see that the person that with the idea is also for the idea. So the idea of syndication, it's a common practice. It occurs when the originating venture capitalist sells a percentage of a deal to another venture capitalist. And this reduces risk because when you sell a part of your percentage to another company, if another company bites and they buy it, that means that they also see that there's promise and there might be a lot of profit in the idea. So it kind of just reassures that your initial investment was a good idea.
You're missing the.
And it also diversifies the investment portfolio. Part 5, having in-depth knowledge about this, it helps reduce risk because you stay informed, and if any red flags arise, you'll be able to catch those. And most venture capitalists need an exit strategy because they're not long-term investors. They usually like to exit a company within 3 to 7 years. Every venture capital agreement has provisions identifying who has the authority to make critical decisions concerning the exit process. So the exit strategy usually includes timing, method, and what price is acceptable. So the 3 principal ways in which venture capital firms exit is a strategic buyer is selling the parts of a firm to a buyer in a private market. Financial buyer, a private equity firm buying a new firm with the intention of holding on for a period of time. And then the third one is the IPO, or the initial public offering. And then venture capital can often provide advice as well as financing. They can provide counsel to entrepreneurs because they know the market better than anyone else, because they usually put in a lot of their own money. And the cost of funding is very high, but the rates of return are high, but not unreasonable. This is why it's lucrative to be a venture capitalist. Usually will generate about 15 to 25% of annual return.
Alright, so now we're going to be talking about IPOs, which are initial public offerings. So this is one way for firms to raise larger sums of cash or to facilitate the exit of a venture capitalist. And so they usually use this IPO to fund stock. So these are first-time stock issues, given the name IPO because the marketing and pricing of these issues are distinctly different from those of seasoned. So we're going to be going through advantages and disadvantages. Some advantages include that the amount of equity capital that can be raised in the public equity market is typically larger than the amount that can be raised through private sources. And once an IPO has been completed, additional equity capital can be used. That can be usually raised through follow-on seasoned public offerings at a lower cost. And going public can enable an entrepreneur to fund a growing business without giving up control. Some disadvantages include that going public is high cost for the IPO itself, so it costs a lot of money to even do the IPO. And the cost of complying with ongoing SEC disclosures requirements also represent disadvantages for the public. And lastly, finally, some investors argue that the SEC's requirement of quarterly earnings forecasts and quarterly financial statements encourages managers to focus on short-term rather than long-term wealth maximization. So continuing on, origination includes giving the firm financial advice, getting the issue ready to sell. So this is kind of how the IPO kind of starts. Through this, they use underwriting, which is a risk-bearing part of investment banking, and firm commitment underwriting, which is a more typical investment banking guarantees the issuer a fixed amount of money from the stock sale. And there's also best effort in the underwriting, which is the investment banking firm makes no guarantee to sell the securities at a particular price. And so, we go to the general cash offer by the company. If a public firm has a high credit rating, the lowest cost source of external funds is often general cash offer, also referred to as a registered public offer. There's 2 ways to do this. It's the competitive, which is when the firm specifies the type and amount of securities it wants to sell, and then hires the investment banking firm to do that origination work, as discussed earlier. Now there's the negotiating, which is the issuer selects the underwriter at the beginning of the origination process, and then once the scope of the work is defined and everything is set out, then the issuer will negotiate to generation and underwriting fees to be charged.
And finally, private versus public.
And then Mary
Because
Beth.
many smaller firms and firms of lower credit standing have limited or no access to public markets, the cheapest source of external funding is often the private markets. When market conditions are
Yeah, we're
unstable,
gonna-
some of the smaller firms that were previously able to sell securities in the public markets no
And
longer
then
can.
reprint this, it's,
And bootstrapping and venture capital financing are a part of the private market as well.
and then pick this, and then print it out.
Many private companies that are owned by entrepreneurs, families, or family foundations are sizable companies of higher credit quality, prefer to
That's all
sell
I got.
their securities in the private markets even though they can access the public markets.
Second to go to board,
And,
you show it to me.
The choice of markets is a function of, one, the desire to avoid regulatory costs and transparency requirements, and preference for working with a smaller group of sophisticated investors rather than the public at large.
Sign off on it.
All right, private
You
placements.
can throw that away.
These occur when a firm sells unregistered securities directly to investors such as insurance companies, commercial banks, or
Brandon?
wealthy individuals. About half of all corporate debt is sold through the private placement market. And investment banks and money center banks often assist firms
Giselle?
with private placements. These banks help issuer locate potential buyers for their securities, put the deal together, and do the necessary origination work, but do not underwrite the issue. And in a traditional private placement, the issuer sells the securities directly to the investors.
Okay, you're done.
Private placements. They have a
Michelle?
number of advantages relative to public offerings for certain issuers, such as the cost of funds. Net of transaction costs may be lower with private placements. Private lenders are more willing to negotiate changes to a bond contract, and if a firm suffers financial distress, the problems are more likely to be resolved without going to bankruptcy court. Finally, other advantages include the speed of private placement deals and flexibility in issuer size.
And you're still working on these.
The biggest drawback of private placements involves restrictions on the resale of securities, and the SEC limits the sale of private placements to several dozen knowledgeable investors who have the capacity to evaluate the securities investment
And then,
potential
Kate
and risk.
Meyer?
To compensate for the lack of marketability, investors in private placements
Claire?
require a higher yield relative to a comparable public offering. Commercial bank lending, prime rate loans. The common types of bank loans are prime rate loans and bank term loans. Prime rate loans are loans in which the borrowing rate is based on the prime rate of interest. The prime rate charged by a bank may be higher than other market borrowing rates because banks provide a range of SC. Bank term loans may be secured or unsecured, and the funds can be used to buy inventory or to finance plant and equipment. Alright, this is the loan pricing model. This is the equation from 15.1. And this is just an example. This is in the book, so you can just go after that later. And these are the solutions. So they're all in the book as well. Awesome.
I wasn't planning on it, but did you get shift?
Jesse? Oh, is she? Okay, so who's next? I thought we had three.
Yeah, we're done.
Oh, are you guys ready?
Can be.
I think we're ready. Michael Yee? And then, you just had
You guys are great. I was like, oh, good. I'm like, that's the one.
The memos that you looked at.
Well, hopefully they find it. I'm in good shape. Oh, well. Rather get it back.
So today we're talking about the fundamentals of corporate finance. My name is David Bortons. This is Colin. So the learning objectives for today are one, define networking capital, discuss the importance of working capital management and compute a firm's net working capital. Two, define the operating and cash conversion cycles, explain how they're used and compute their values for a firm. Discuss the relative advantages and disadvantages of pursuing one, flexible, and two, restrictive current asset management strategies. And then four, explain how accounts receivables are created and managed and compute the cost of trade credit. And then learning objectives continued is explain the trade-off between carrying costs and reorder costs and compute the economic order quantity for a firm's inventory costs. And then six, define cash collection time. Discuss how a firm can minimize this time and compute the economic costs and benefits of a lockbox. And the final learning objective is describe three current assets financing strategies and discuss the main sources of short-term financing. So the working capital basics. Working capital management involves two key issues. The first one is what is the appropriate amount and mix of current assets for the firm to hold. And then the second is how should these current assets be financed. So here's a little exhibit of like Apple Inc.'s financial statements for the fiscal year ending in 2016. And so you can just kind of look at that. Okay, so some terms and concepts. So one is current assets, which are cash and other assets that the firm expects to convert into cash in a year or less. So for example, like account receivable and just inventory. And then another term is current liabilities or short-term liabilities. They're obligations that the firm expects to pay off in a year or less. For example, like accounts payable, any kind of taxes, sales tax, income tax. And then another term is working capital, also called gross working capital, which are the funds invested in a company's cash accounts, receivables, inventory, and other current assets. Another term is net working capital, or NWC, which refers to the difference between current assets and current liabilities. It is important because it is a measure of liquidity, and it represents the net short-term investment that firms keep in the business. And then there's working capital management, which involves making decisions regarding the use and sources of current assets. Working capital efficiency refers to the length of time between when a working capital asset is acquired and when it is converted into cash. And then liquidity is the ability of a company to convert real or financial assets into cash quickly without loss of value. So the working capital accounts and trade-offs. So the working capital accounts include cash, which includes cash and other highly liquid short-term money market instruments. And then there's receivables, which represent the amount owed by customers who have availed themselves for the firm's trade credit facility. And then the firm maintains inventory of raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. And then there's payables, which represent the amount owed to the firm's vendors and suppliers for material purchased on credit. Increasing working capital costs money, but should lead to increased sales and better relationships with vendors, suppliers, and employees. So, operating in cash conversion cycles. The cash conversion cycle is the length of time from the point at which a company pays for raw materials until the point at which it receives cash, the sale of finished goods made from those materials.
Did you already do that?
The sequence of events occurs and the firm uses cash to pay for the cost of raw materials and the cost of conversion. Finished goods are held in finished goods inventory until they are sold. Finished goods are sold on credit to the firm's customers, and the customers would pay the credit the firm has extended them, and the firm receives the cash. So here's a little diagram kind of explaining how it's all very circular and feeds into each other. Same thing. So the goals of financial managers in managing the cycle is 1, to delay paying accounts as long as possible. 2, to maintain minimal raw material inventories, and then to use as little labor as possible to manufacture the product while maintaining quality. Then the goals of financial managers in managing the cycle continues is to maintain minimal finished good inventories without losing sales, to offer customers the most attractive credit terms possible on trade, and then to collect cash payments on accounts receivable as fast as possible. So here's another diagram showing kind of similar. Is it a square or something? I mean, it's represented as a square, but it could be drawn as a circle as well, I think. Yeah, it's yeah. And then the operating cycle. So the operating cycle begins when the firm uses its cash to purchase raw materials and ends when the firm collects cash payments on its credit sales. So the days sales and inventory shows how long a firm keeps its inventory before selling it. The ratio of the inventory balance to the daily cost of goods sold. So DSI equals 365 days over inventory turnover. And then from here on, oh wait, and then here's another exhibit showing that.
Okay, just to continue off what Dave was talking about, this is pretty similar to the DSI, the days sales outstanding. It's estimate how long it takes on average for the firm to collect its outstanding accounts receivable balances, also called the average collection period. So basically, capitalizing on debts that they're owed, and then these are just the equations on how to find them. So the cash conversion cycle that Dave was also talking about doesn't start until the firm actually pays for its inventory, and it represents the length of time between the cash outflow for material and the cash inflow from sales. So you think about cash outflow as like the costs, and then cash inflow is like the revenue from sales. So days payable outstanding tells how long a firm takes to pay off its suppliers for the cost of their inventory to grow its assets. And then so these are the two ways that we can calculate the conversion cycle. So first one is DSI plus DSO minus DPO. Second one is operating cycle minus DPO. And then here's a balance sheet that you can use. Like you can use this balance sheet to find the cash conversion cycle using accounts payable, short-term investments, things like that, and total current assets. So working capital management strategies. Financial managers use two types of strategies for current assets, flexible and restrictive. The flexible current assets management strategy has a high percent of current assets to sales, whereas restrictive policy has a low percent of current assets to sales, which will lead to some differences in investment strategy, which I'll talk about in a second. So flexible current asset management strategy calls for management to invest large amounts in cash, marketable securities, and inventory, so more of your current assets. It's considered low risk and low return. The advantage of the strategy is large working capital balances, and the downside of the strategy is the high carrying costs associated with owning a high level of inventory and providing liberal credit terms to consumers. Because if you think about it, if you incur a lot of inventory and you don't sell all of it, you're going to have a lot of costs on your hands without making any revenue. So the restrictive current asset management strategy is the complete opposite. It's a high risk, high return alternative to the flexible strategy. So the high risk comes in from the shortage costs, both financial and operating. So operating costs result from lost production and sales, and financial shortage costs arise mainly from illiquidity, shortage of cash, and lack of marketable securities to sell for cash.
And then the fourth strategy, the working capital trade-off. The management will try to find the level of current assets that minimizes the sum of the carrying costs and shortage costs. So just some cool points about it. The optimal current assets investment strategy will depend on the relative magnitudes of carrying costs and shortage costs. This conflict is often referred to as the working capital trade-off. Financial managers need to balance shortage costs against carrying costs to define an optimal strategy. Carrying costs are larger than shortage costs, and the firm will maximize value by adopting a more strict strategy. On the other hand, if shortage costs dominate carrying costs, the firm will need to move towards a more flexible policy. Things that are pretty obviously stated. So accounts receivable, which you guys should all know, is companies frequently make sales to customers on credit by delivering goods in exchange for the promise of future payment. Obviously, the promise of an account receivable from the firm's point of view. Offering credit to consumers can help a firm attract customers by differentiating the firm and its products from its competitors. Also, if you're giving out accounts receivable, it also helps create it helps create repeat customers. So if you're offering credit to customers, they'll come back for more business. In terms of sale, whenever a firm sells a product, the seller spells out the terms and conditions of the sale in a document called the terms of sale. The agreement specifies when the payment is due and the amount of any discount if early payment is made. All stuff from accounting classes. The simplest offer is cash on delivery or COD with no credit offered. When credit is a part of the sale, the terms of the sale spell out of the credit agreement between the buyer and seller. Trade credit, which is short-term financing, is typically made with a discount for early payment rather than explicit interest charge. So companies want their money sooner rather than later, so they'll offer incentives for people to pay them sooner rather than later. Trade credit is a loan from the supplier, and it's usually a very costly form of credit. We can find the effective annual rate for trade credit using the following formula. Aging accounts receivable. Common tool that credit managers use is called an aging schedule. The aging schedule shows the breakdown of a firm's accounts receivable by their date and sale, how long the account has not been paid. Its purpose is to identify and then track delinquent accounts and to see that they get paid. So obviously you're tracking down your money because you want the money. Aging schedules are also an important tool for analyzing the quality of the firm's receivables. The aging schedule reveals patterns of delinquency and shows where collections efforts should be concentrated. Here's a little graph that shows the aging value, the aging schedule of accounts receivable, kind of similar to like the time value of money. Inventory management is largely a function of operations management, not financial management. Manufacturing companies generally carry three types of inventory: raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. Again, all stuff that you should have learned in your accounting classes. Capital invested in inventory provides no direct return, but running out of raw materials can cause manufacturing to shut down at a greater cost to the firm. And here's an equation that's pretty useful in determining this. The EOQ mathematically determines the minimum total inventory cost taking into account reorder costs and inventory carrying costs. The optimal order size strikes a balance between these two costs. So basically making sure that you don't go over when ordering inventory or go under to not meet demand.
So just-in-time inventory management is just a way that big companies use. It's pretty self-explanatory. As the inventory arrives, it's arriving just before production starts, which virtually gets rid of all lost or stolen inventory. But any sort of problem with that delivery could like completely stop production. Cash management and budgeting. There are three reasons that companies hold cash. First, it facilitates transactions with suppliers, customers, and employees. Second, for precautionary or strategic reasons, meaning being able to invest in a cash expenditure on the spot. And the third reason for holding cash is simply that most banks require firms to hold compensating balances. Cash collection. So collection time or float time is the time between when the customer makes the payment and when the
cash becomes available to the firm. Collection time can be broken down into 3 components: delivery, processing delay, and filing delay between the time and the deposit. Basically, it's just common sense. Lock boxes are a way that people who are geographically dispersed and challenged can get to a post office and drop off their checks and payments. Electronic funds transfer is an online transfer, so it eliminates mailing time. Second, the processing time is reduced or eliminated since no data entry is necessary. Finally, electronic funds transfer typically have little or no delay in fund availability. So basically, it's like a Venmo. It goes right to your bank account. Financing working capital. The minimum level of working capital is viewed as permanent working capital. So the next slide shows all this. So each one of these shows the long-term financing needed, consisting of long-term equity and the seasonal needs for working capital that fluctuates with levels of scale. Finance working capital are strategies for finance working capital. The maturity matching strategy is one of the most basic techniques used by financial managers to reduce risk when financing assets. Another strategy is the long-term funding strategy. It is shown in panel C of 14.7. And all the permanent working capitals and fixed assets funded with long-term financing, so just planning for the long run. And then the short-term financing strategy or funding strategy is shown on panel C, which shows a line being dropped down. This strategy relies on short-term debt to finance all seasonal working capital and portion of the permanent working capital and fixed assets. Financing working capital in practice. Matching maturities. Nearly all financial managers try to match the maturities of assets and liabilities when funding the firm. When there's permanent working capital, most financial managers like to fund some of their current assets with long-term debt, as shown in panel B. Sources of short-term financing. Accounts payable, since it's going to be paid within the year, it's short-term, and accounts payable like bank loans, commercial paper, or are common sources of short-term financing. Short-term bank loans, if the firm backs a loan with an asset, the loan is defined as secured, otherwise the loan is unsecured. An informal line of credit is verbal agreement between the firm and the bank allowing the firm to borrow up to an agreed upon upper limit. Formal line of credit is also known as revolving credit. Under this type of agreement, the bank has a legal obligation to lend an amount of money up to a preset limit. The firm pays a yearly fee in addition to the interest expense on the amount they borrow. Sources of short-term financing. So commercial paper. Commercial paper is a promissory note issued by large financially secured firms that have high credit ratings. Account receivable financing. So we went over this earlier. Account receivable is money that people owe you. Accounts receivable financing is an important source of funds for medium-sized and small businesses. And then that's our chapter. Dave Wiz.
And then show me that stuff. Maybe bring it back to me. We can nip down. I'm gonna keep it. And show it to me week of the midterm. Yeah, show it to me so I can be grading and stuff. You weren't
chapter
gonna do
16, capital structure policy. So capital structure and firm value. A firm's capital structure is the mix of financial securities used to finance its activities, which include common stock, debt, and preferred stock. Optimal capital structure is managers at a firm choose a capital structure so that the mix of securities making up the capital structure minimizes the cost of financing the firm's activities. And the capital structure that minimizes the cost of financing the firm's projects is also the capital structure that maximizes the total value of those projects and therefore overall value of the firm. So the Modigliani and Miller propositions. So the eminent proposition 1 states that the capital structure decisions a firm makes will have no effect on the value of the firm if there are no taxes, there's no information or transaction costs, the real investment policy of the firm is not affected by its capital structure decisions. So the equation for proposition 1. So the real investment policy of the firm includes the criteria that the firm uses in deciding which real assets to invest in. The market value of the debt plus the market value of the equity must equal the value of the cash flows produced by the firm's assets, referred to as the firm value or enterprise value. So the V firm equals the V assets. Yeah, you get the idea. So the eminent proposition 2 states that the required return on a firm's common stock is directly related to the debt to liquidity ratio. If a firm has 1 times equity, then so basically you rearrange the first equation, the WACC, the X debt, K debt plus XCS, KSCS, and so it's KCS equals K assets plus V debt divided by V CS times K assets minus K debt. And then equation 16.3 reflects 2 sources of the risk in cash flows to stockholders. So the business risk associated with the characteristics of the firm's business activities, financial risk associated with the capital structure of the firm, which reflects the effect that the firm's financing decisions have on the risks of the cash flows that the stockholders will receive, and financial risk is associated with required payments to firm lenders. So what the eminent proposition tells us is that eminent analysis tell us exactly where we should look if we want to understand how capital structure affects firm value and the cost of equity. If financial policy matters, it must be because venture capital. And venture capitalists provide more than financing. Their involvement depends on the experience of the management team, and one of their most important roles is to provide advice. Okay. Venture capital costs. The cost is very high, but the high rates of return earned by the venture capitalists are not unreasonable. A typical venture capital fund may generate annual returns of 15 to 25% compared with an average annual return for the S&P 500 of about 12%. Taxes, information, or transaction costs and capital structure choices that affect a firm's real investment policy also affect the venture capital cost. And benefits of debt. The interest tax shield benefit, which debt provides managers with incentives to focus on maximizing the cash flows that the firm produces, since interest and principal payments must be made when they are due. And then the cost of debt. Financial managers limit the amount of debt in their firm's capital structures, in part because their costs that can become quite substantial at high levels of debt. At low levels of debt, the benefits are greater than the cost, and adding additional debt increases the overall value of the firm. And at some point, the costs begin to exceed the benefit, which add more debt financing, which destroys the firm's value. Financial managers want to add debt just to the point at which the value of the firm is maximized. And bankruptcy costs and agency costs are also 2 forms of cost of debt. So the trade-off theory. The trade-off theory of capital structure says that managers choose a specific target capital structure based on the trade-offs between the benefits and the cost of debt. The theory says that managers will increase debt to the point at which the costs and benefits of adding an additional dollar of
pecking order theory. Managers view internally generated funds or cash on hand as the cheapest source of capital. Debt is more costly to create internally generated funds, but is still relatively inexpensive. Raising money by selling stock is the most inexpensive. Empirical
Yep.
evidence. The more profitable a firm is, the less debt it tends to have, which is exactly the opposite what the trade-off theory suggests we should see. This evidence is consistent with the pecking order theory. The pecking order theory is also supported by the fact that in an average year, public firms actually repurchase more shares than they sell.
So, the homework problems that we just did, so 16.5, the solution is the WAC X debt, K debt plus XCS, KCS, so it ends up being 20%. And then the 1611 is the WAC, which is K debt, or X debt times K debt plus XCS, KCS, like the last one is 10.5%. And the final one, we use the WAC formula of 1 minus T plus K debt times V debt divided by V firm, plus KCS times VCS divided by V firm, which is 15%. That's the end.
I can go keep this. I'll keep this. Okay, Cassidy, I want to go over here. Thank you. So pull out your notes for the, to do the last problem in the midterm. Okay, everybody got their notes? Got your notes? Okay. So we're going to do the last problem on the midterm. We actually already did this. We did this on the first problem on the midterm. So we're going to do it again. All right. So basically, this is the investment decision-making matrix. This is your capital budgeting and investment decision-making rules. And we're going to do Larry's finance sing-along at the Castro Theater. So we're going to, you're going to need to go through this, and you're going to need to participate and yell out the solutions here as we walk through it. Okay? And what I would do too is I would pull up, use your notes from last week to go through this. Okay? We've already gone through this a bunch of times, so it should be pretty easy. But you want to test your ability, okay, to think about this stuff. Because when you're in the meeting with some of these people, particularly when you're talking about capital budgeting, buying equipment, launching an advertising campaign, a marketing campaign, buying a piece of equipment, building a piece of real estate, buying a piece of real estate, buying or building a technology company or a company, you're going through these thought processes, okay? So we've already run the discounted cash flow, and we have the present value is greater than the price or the cost. So do we accept or reject?
Accept.
Okay. And if the present value is equal to the price, do we accept or reject?
Accept.
If the present value is less than the price or the cost, do you accept or reject?
Reject.
If the net present value is positive, do you accept or reject?
Accept.
If the net present value is 0, do you accept or reject?
Accept.
If the net present value is negative, do you accept or reject?
Reject.
It's like a choir with really bad voices. Maybe you can give it to me in C. Maybe you can, see, there you go. Sing it to me in C. Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, if the internal rate of return is greater than the weighted average cost of capital, do you accept or reject?
Accept.
And if the IRR is equal to the WACC, do you accept or reject? If the IRR is less than the WACC, do you accept or reject?
Reject.
If the break-even is less than 3 years, do you accept or reject?
Accept.
And if the break-even is equal to 3 years, do you accept or reject?
Oh, harmonies.
Thanks. And if the break-even is greater than 3 years, do you accept or reject?
Reject.
Got it. All right. So this is pretty straightforward, but what happens if you get a negative net present value and you make the recommendation to reject, but the board of directors and the investment committee decides that they still want to pursue the project? What would you do next?
Renegotiate.
You go to iteration 2 and you would
Renegotiate.
renegotiate the price or the cost. And what would be the price reduction that you would ask for?
The negative net present value.
Ask for a price reduction. In the amount of the negative net present value. Got it. And if you can get that, what's the net present value?
0.
0. If you can get an MPV of 0, would you accept or reject?
Accept.
Accepted. And if you couldn't get the price reduction in the amount of the negative net present value, then your net present value would be?
0.
If you couldn't get the price reduction in the amount of the negative net present value, then your net present value would be negative, and you would reject it. Okay. Well, what if the board and the investment committee still really wants this project, this advertising campaign, marketing campaign, the IT project, the development, the startup company, whatever it is, what would you do next?
Iteration.
You go to iteration 3 and
Recheck your assumptions.
reevaluate the assumptions. Got it. And what would be the assumptions that you would reevaluate? Give me the
Pro forma.
pro forma cash flows. Cash flows, and that would be the growth rates.
Growth rates.
The growth rates in the pro forma cash flows, what else?
Discount.
Got it. The expected rate of return,
Going in.
back. Okay, what else?
Initial year cash flow.
What?
Initial year cash flow.
Yeah,
Your favorite one.
initial year cash flow, what else?
Multipliers.
Yeah, the multiples. Okay, anything else? Any others? What about the rest of the growth rates? Are there some other growth rates? Yeah, Gordon Grove,
Terminal.
yeah. So the Gordon Grove would be going in, and the terminal growth rates. Anything else? Also on the expected returns in the WACC, isn't there an initial for going in? is also terminal. And when talking about terminal discount rates and terminal growth rates, what are we calculating with that? We're calculating the terminal value. I think we got some here that we can play with. Okay, now I'm going to test you. Okay. If we're getting a negative net present value, did we over or underestimate the pro forma cash flow growth rates?
Under.
Okay, so if we're getting a negative net present value, we underestimate or overestimate the growth rate in the cash flow growth rates? Underestimated. Okay. So if we underestimated it, we can raise the growth rates. What happens to the present value?
Goes up.
Goes up. Net present value?
Goes up.
Internal rate of return?
Goes up.
And break even?
Goes up.
Got it. Okay. And what about the expected return or the discount rate or the weighted average cost of capital? If we're getting a negative net present value, did we over or underestimate the discount rate? We overestimated it. So if we can lower our expected return, or we can lower our cost of debt, or cost of equity, or maybe increase the weight of our capital structure to the debt or the equity, that's going to cause the discount rate to do what? Go down. And if the discount rate goes down, what happens to the present value? Goes up. The net present value, internal rate of return, break even. Excellent. Okay. What about the initial year cash flow? Did we over or underestimate it? We underestimated it. So if we go back and we re-underwrite and find out that the initial cash flow was underestimated, and we can increase it, what happens to the present value? Goes up. Net present value, internal rate of return, break even. What if all of a sudden we look into the marketplace and we find out that there have been some firms that are currently traded that we didn't have? Did we over or underestimate the multiples? If we have a negative net present value? We underestimated it. So if there's new multiples or new transactions that have come out at higher multiples, what's that going to do to the value, the present value? It's going to go up. What's going to happen to the net present value? Internal rate of return, break even. Got it. And then what about the going in and the terminal growth rates for using the Gordon growth model? Did we over or underestimate the growth rates for the Gordon growth model? Did we over or underestimate the growth rates? We underestimated it. So if we go back and we can justify increasing the growth rates, what happens to the present value? Net present value, internal rate of return, break even. Got it. And what about the terminal value? Did we over or underestimate the terminal value? Underestimated the terminal value. So if we lower the terminal discount rate or increase the terminal growth rate, the terminal value is going to go up. And if it goes up, the present value goes up, net present value, internal rate of return, break even. You guys are awesome. Then we still get a negative net present value. Then what do we do? Yeah, we go to iteration 4 and we calculate the value of the real call option. And how would I calculate the value of the real call option? What are the
Black-Scholes and binomial tree.
And what are the three main factors that drive the value of the real call option?
Management decisions.
Management decisions. Got it. What else?
Price, value, volatility.
Price and value, volatility, and time.
Yes, sir. Time value.
Got it.
Time value.
Which one's gonna have more management decisions involved in it? Building out a multi-billion-dollar high-tech biopharma research institution campus in Mission Bay, or launch a startup company.
The Mission Bay.
Mission Bay. Okay, so which one's gonna have which one's gonna have a higher real call option value?
Mission Bay.
Mission Bay. Okay. And then what about the price value volatility? Which one's gonna be more volatile? Probably the startup. Would Salesforce Tower be subjected to price value volatility because the majority of the tenants in the building are high-tech companies?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then what are, can you give me 2 measures of volatility? Come here, pretest. How would you measure volatility? What are the 2 measures of volatility? How would you measure volatility? How would you measure risk? How would you calculate it? Using statistics, statistical measures, statistical calculation. Can you give me 2 measures of volatility? How would you measure risk? No, I'm looking for, statistics, statistical calculation, and actual mathematics.
On like the standard deviation,
Yeah, the standard deviation and,
Z-score?
the Z, yeah.
how do you get the standard deviation? Yeah, you gotta calculate the variance, take the square root of the variance, and you get the standard deviation. So the 2 measures would be using the variance and the standard deviation, but the standard deviation is what you use. Okay, and then time value. Which project has more time value to it?
Mission
A
Bay.
2-year project or a 5-year project? So I have 2 years to make a decision or 5 years to make a decision. Which one has more call option value? The ability to make the decision in 2 years or in 5 years?
2 years.
The 2 years or the 5 years? Which one is 5 years? Has the highest time. Okay, excellent. And what does the value of the real call option need to be?
Greater than or equal to the net.
Yeah, it's gonna be greater than or equal to the negative NPV. Got it. So if the value of the real call option is greater than the negative net present value, what's your net present value gonna be? No. If the value of the real call option is greater than the negative net present value, then your net present value is gonna be positive. And are you gonna accept or reject?
Accept.
Got it. With conviction. Okay. And then what happens if the value of the real call option is equal to the negative net present value? Your net present value is what?
0.
Got it. And do you accept or reject?
Accept.
And if the value of the real call option is less than the negative net present value, then your net present value is what?
Negative.
Negative. And you're going to reject. Got it. Is there an iteration 5?
No.
No, that's it. Okay. I think that's it. That's it for me. What about you?
Yeah.
So no class on Thursday. Thank you.